Hey everyone, this is Chef, and welcome back to Commander Camp. In this video, we're going to talk about commanding as a Moa, and I know what you're thinking, haha, good April Fool's joke. Thank you, I appreciate it. I thought it would be very funny. But also, I'm serious. The documentation on what your Moa skills do is very poor. It's an uncommon skill to see, and the main advantage that enemy groups get from using Moa is in its surprise value, confusing the person targeted by it. So in this video, we're going to talk about being a Moa, what professions cause it, how you can play around it, what your Moa skills do, and how they interact with your traits, with the goal of making sure that the next time you get Moa'd, you're ready for it. Let's jump right in with professions that are able to Moa you in the first place. The most obvious and most common source is going to be Messmer's Signet of Humility. This is a 1200 range, 1 second cast, 90 second cooldown, elite skill that polymorphs the target into a Moa for 6 seconds. Signet of Humility will appear on the Messmer's buff bar when being used, and checking enemy Messmers for whether they have the passive benefit from Signet of Humility can be a good way to know whether you should expect to get Moa'd later in a fight. The second and less common means of turning a player into a Moa is Engineer's Toss Elixir X tool belt skill. Toss Elixir X is a 900 range, half second cast, 60 second cooldown, ground targeted elite tool belt skill that polymorphs up to 3 targets into Moas for 3 seconds. Both Signet of Humility and Toss Elixir X are blocked by Aegis applications, but their effects ignore stability. Toss Elixir X is also a projectile and can be destroyed, or worse, reflected back onto yourself and your allies. But let's say that you didn't have Aegis or projectile reflex, and now you're a Moa. This is what's known as an unfortunate outcome. The first drawback to being a Moa is that you don't have access to your defensive utilities, profession mechanics, or personal cooldowns. While not ideal, your supports can help keep you alive, or you can just delay your push and your movements until you have your abilities back. But the second drawback to being a Moa is that it's surprising, and you probably don't know what the buttons do. It's confusing, and it might annoy you, or make you panic, and fight differently as a result. You can deny these advantages to your opponent by knowing what each of your skills do in advance, and using them appropriately during your bird time. Your two biggest priorities while you're a Moa are your 2 skill and your 5 skill. But you also have several skills that can actively harm you if you use them at the wrong time, or even at all. Because the wiki documentation on Moa is relatively poor, we're going to talk about each of your 5 skills here. Your Moa 1 skill, Claw, deals light damage to 3 targets, and also leaps you forwards a small amount, but this also has a fairly long animation, and generally does more harm than good. Try and avoid pressing this one if you can help it. Moa 2, Kick, is a short ground-targeted leap skill that cripples enemies, and is also a leap finisher. If you have the presence of mind, look for water fields to leap into for an initial burst of healing, or even better, smoke fields to grant stealth to yourself and ride out the rest of the Moa. Moa 3, Peck, is a channel damage ability, and like Moa 1, this is one you will want to avoid using. It locks you into an animation. Moa 4, Screech, is also one to avoid, with a lengthy cast time and a weak effect, weakness and light damage to 4 targets. But Moa 5, Flee, is arguably your best Moa skill. When used, it charges your character, but it also has an evade attached to it for 0.75 seconds. Letting you negate damage for a large portion of the time that you spend being a Moa overall. Despite Moa 2 and Moa 5 both being movement skills, they don't interact with trait choices that check for character movement. For example, the discipline trait Warrior's Sprint, which clears immobilization when using a movement skill, does not trigger off of either Moa 2 or Moa 5. Nor does Brave Stride, which gives stability when using movement skills in the strength tree. I'll be honest, these are the only 2 interactions that I actually tested, because I'm not going to do 3 or 4 hours of trait interaction testing for a polymorph that lasts 6 seconds max. But I would expect other movement traits, or traits that care about comboing fields, or traits that care about applying conditions like Cripple, to not trigger off of either of these skills as well. And finally, while many kits and bundles will trigger weapon swap sigils, Moa does not. Any weapon swap sigils, like Energy, that you have equipped will not be activated by the polymorph. Neither Signet of Humility or Toss Elixir X are good skills. Getting Moa'd while you're commanding in World vs. World means there's one less Chronomancer in the enemy group using Gravity Well, or one less Engineer using Mortar Kit, but for players using Moa, the biggest advantage is knowing that you, as an enemy commander, have been annoyed and confused for a small portion of an overall fight. And knowing what your Moa skills do, and utilizing them effectively, even negates this advantage. That said, if you're being Moa'd every single fight, it's always an option to find another group, move maps, or even tag down and do something else with your time. Commander pick has a tendency of ruining the fun for all groups involved, and it's never the most valuable utility skill choice for World vs. World on your profession. So there you go. Everything you need to know about being a Moa in World vs. World. I hope that this information is helpful to you next time you run into a Mesmer or Engineer when you're commanding, or even if you're just playing. If you liked this video, let me know by leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing to the channel. And if you want to watch me get Moa'd in real time, I stream Guild Wars 2 on Twitch every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. But until then, I've been Chef, and enjoy the rest of your day.